It seems like every year I hear, there's one more story we read about of finding life that in some impossible environment, and then all of a sudden that's just accepted that, oh, life can live there too. Where can life not live?
Well, from now decades of searching for life in all the odd places, the one rule that we can say, the one boundary is liquid water. That is really the boundary. That's the important boundary for life. As long as we can have liquid water, everything else can be to some extent negotiated. Energy sources, other elements, um, all those sorts of things can be negotiated, but liquid water. And Earth has lots of liquid water. It's just about everywhere on this planet. And so the deeper we dig and the farther we look on Earth, we tend to always find life because we're always in environments that are wet or have liquid water at some level. In the Antarctic deserts, in the Chilean deserts, everywhere there's some water that life can get a hold of, and then it negotiates the rest. But when we look beyond the Earth, then the liquid water becomes a important constraint. We look at Mars, we don't see liquid water very many places at all, if at all. Venus, elsewhere as well. That's why you often hear NASA's search for life described as follow the water, search for water first. If we can establish that a place has water, then we're much, much more interested and much, much more optimistic in the possibility that it has life. Now, one of the things we do is generalize that. Say, well, it's not water per se, but it's a liquid. Life needs a liquid. Life wants to be squishy, and it needs a liquid to be squishy in. And that takes us to Titan, an interesting world, the only other world in our solar system that has a liquid on its surface, besides the Earth. Earth has water. Titan has liquid methane in lakes near the polar regions. And so it's the other world with a liquid, a different liquid. And the whole possibility that life could live in that liquid has gotten a lot of interest lately. So we have worlds with water, Earth, worlds that had water, Mars, worlds that may have water below the ice, Europa and Enceladus, and then worlds with another liquid, Titan. And that's the cast, if you will, for the story of life in our solar system.
We talk you talk about the need for liquid water, and and that's clear. And yet there are these organisms like Deinococcus radiodurans, for example, that can go for such a very, very long time without that. To me, it seems to change the game in terms of where life might get to. Say there's a large asteroid impact and lots of pieces of rock are knocked off big enough, head-sized pieces of rock big enough to be interplanetary travelers, and it seems to me that that knowledge changes where life might get around in the universe.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit, if you would.
Well, it's certainly true that life needs liquid water, but it only needs liquid water when it's growing or reproducing. When organisms are dormant, they can dry up and be in a dormant state, and we don't know what the limit is on how long they can be dormant. For all intents and purposes, some organisms can be dormant forever. So you can imagine a dormant bug inside of a rock being kicked out into space, flying for millions of years even, landing on another world, that rock breaking open, and that bug getting wet, getting rained on, coming back to life, and crawling out. One giant step for a small bug, one small step for a bug, one giant step for bug kind, and here they are on Mars, or that could have been Earth, and the bug could have been flying in from Mars. So the ability of organisms to spread in the dormant phase is something we don't even fully understand. And my thinking is that it's entirely possible for organisms to spread from planet to planet, and I think even from star to star, because they can be so resilient in the dormant phase. They're not growing, but they're alive. This is, in a sense, what we've done to Mars. We've put organisms inside spacecraft on Mars. They're not growing. They're not doing anything. They're just sitting there. They are a potential to grow if conditions ever changed. And this is a very important distinction. Life needs water to grow, but life can be dormant almost forever, just in dry, dehydrated state, living inside rocks, dormant inside rocks for a very, very long period of time.
Yeah, the word living gets strange there because this is all the potential for living is there, and obviously it's going to need to bump into a place with its requirements met, where its requirements can be met, and some water and
exactly. So these organisms are alive, but they're not living in the sense of they're metabolizing right now. They're dormant.
That knowledge, which is not brand new knowledge, you've been studying bugs, if you will, for a long time. Does it change the way you look at the universe in terms of where we? Does life need just to get started once? And is it basically?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess my question, and I think it's a fun question, is life unstoppable now? In a sort of.
We don't know, and this is an important question. It could be that when we go out and search, what we find is all the same life, all the one tree of life. That life is spread. Even without humans to help it, life is spread. This question, can life exchange and is life unstoppable even on its own, has affected the way we search for life. I remember years ago, just the question of searching for life on Mars was purely a question of detecting life on Mars, because by definition, an alien was any life form on another planet. That was our definition of an alien. An organism from another planet equals alien. We're searching for aliens. Now we've changed the definition. We say an alien is an organism that is not on our tree of life, regardless of what planet it is on. So now we go to Mars, we have to search not just for evidence of life, but we have to search for enough evidence that we can put that organism in relationship with our life to determine if it's our cousin, our relative or not. If it's our cousin, it's not an alien. It may live on Mars, but it's not an alien. So now our definition of an alien is an organism that is not related to the genome of life on Earth.
Was there a moment when that occurred? I mean, sort of like the moment when when Pluto was demoted. I mean, was there a moment when a particular conference, or when that? Because I did not know that. I would assume that if we if we went to Titan and found a 9-headed fang-bearing methane swimming. We would certainly call that an alien, whether he shared my DNA.
If that organism mapped onto our tree of life, then I would not call it an alien. It shares a common origin with us. We could trace back, and at some point, that monster and us would have a common ancestor. Right? We say, "Don't eat me. I'm related to you." If that organism represents...
It doesn't work well on Earth.
Yeah, it doesn't work well on Earth. In fact, it's the opposite. We eat things that we're the most related to. But if we go to Titan and we find something living in the methane, it's very unlikely that it's related to us, because what we have on Earth is water-based life using water-soluble molecules. What we're going to have on Titan is methane-based life using methane-soluble molecules. So the probability that we share a common origin, that we share DNA with a methane organism is essentially zero.
You're right about that. A sea monster on Europa would have been better.
Yeah, or a microbe on Mars. That's the real story. We go to Mars, we might find a fossil and say, oh, wow, there was life on Mars. But that's no longer the interesting question. Now we want to find the actual organism. We want to look at its DNA, or whatever it has for DNA, and say, does that organism related to our life form? If it is, then it's just a distant cousin from another planet. If it's not, then it's an alien, and we have proof that there's been two origins of life right here in our solar system.
I think one way to get those answers is to climb on board rockets and go to other places and search, or send your probes out on rockets. Another thing we do in the meantime is we learn better how our universe is put together and how carbon behaves, and how over time does this question of another tree of life, a separate tree of life, does it become clearer to you over time that that's probably less likely, or does that still just remain a? I mean, there are these sort of, you mentioned methane. There are these other sort of possible contenders, I guess, is for lack of a better term. But in the meantime, we also check off, no, that wouldn't work. It's hard to see how alive. It's try to computer simulate it. It doesn't add up.
Well, we can't really check. We can't rule anything out, rule anything in. It's very hard to have a general understanding of a phenomenon when you only have one example. So we have life on Earth. And we think of life on Earth as this wondrous, diverse phenomenon. But in fact, at its biochemical root, at its genetic root, it's one type of life. And so people say to me, well, you can't have methane life because it couldn't do this and this and this that we do. Well, maybe it doesn't need to do this and this and this that we do. So it's very hard to make any constraints. I think this is a case where the science will only advance, our understanding will only advance by going out and looking. We really need to be driven by the data here. The theory is very hard, and you can understand that because we can't even explain or replicate the life that we have. We have one example of life. We can't even duplicate it in the laboratory. The best we've been able to do is take the genome, synthesize it, and stick it in a living cell and have it continue to live, which is an important step. I'm not diminishing the importance of that step, but we're far from being able to synthesize the life that we've already got the example of. In a sense, we've got the answer in the back of the book, and we still can't work out the problem. And now we're going to talk about, well, what's it going to be like on another world? We're just way, way too early in our understanding of life as a phenomenon to rule anything out or to rule anything in.
Well, Chris, when I go back to my old math classes, it was the show your work was always the hardest
Yeah,
part.
right. Right. We know what the answer is, but we can't show our work to how to get there. We know that carbon can turn into life, and we know what the answer looks like, but we can't make the steps in between.
Yeah, and it's a good point. Because, I mean, it's not as if at each step of the way we say, "Oh, that's totally intuitive." It's not, and we you know, 10 years ago we're talking about junk DNA, and now we're saying, okay,
it's not junk at all. It's very
junk,
important.
junkyard to begin with. So.
Yeah.